All right. So question 21. In a closed economy with no government, investment increases by 400. At the new equilibrium level of income, consumption has increased by 1200. What is the value of the investment multiplier? Now, your investment multiplier basically is just referring to the regular multiplier that I used to study about. It's the same thing. Don't worry about that. So just think of it. What is the value of the multiplier? Now, if you think about it, the multiplier is something that takes in an injection, and in this case your injection was $400 of investment and changes national income by a particular amount. Now a lot of you will be tempted to do three because a change in investment of 400 led to an increase in income of 1200. However, be careful about one thing, and the reason why this is four is because, well, national income has in fact increased by the 400 of the investment and the 1200 of the consumption, because for a closed economy with no government, your aggregate expenditure would be C plus I. So C has gone up by 1200, I has gone up by 400, which means aggregate expenditure or national income, because you're at the new equilibrium level, that has gone up by 1600. So 400 brings about 1600, which means 400 times 4 would bring about 1600. So you can go with C. Assuming a constant income velocity of circulation, if the price level increases by 5% and this money supply grows by 2%, what will be the approximate change in real output, that is transactions? So let me just write this here. MV is equals to PT, but that that V here, that is income velocity, is constant. So I'm just quickly going to make that the subject because that will just make things a little easier. Now, what we do know is that price level has gone up by 5%, that money supply has gone up by 2%, and we want a change in transactions such that the overall change is zero. It's 0% because, again, V is the same. So if you think about it, if you just look at this is somewhat, if 5 upon 2 is like somewhat like 2.5, a positive 2.5, if I just look at price and money supply. So transactions has to be something like minus 2.5 to kind of balance that out, such that the overall change for income velocity is zero, because as stated in the question, that is constant. So we can go with B. Shayar, do you agree with this?
Yeah, no, and the way I do it is थोड़ा सा different. I do it in a way कि like V constant रख दिया, सही है. उसके बाद क्योंकि NV equals to PT, so if the money supply increases by 2%, that should be a 2% increase. So assuming कि दोनों ने start पे 100 रखा हुआ था, it goes to 102, सही है. Index अगर if I put 100 as the index, and price level increased by 5%, which makes it आपका 105, and if I divide them and multiply it by 100, I'd get 97, which gives me a minus 3% answer.
Okay. Not too sure what happened there. So you're basically saying that, what are you saying?
Yeah, I just like equations समझ के solve करा with keeping them as 100 रख लो, या जो भी तुमने index रखना है. I just calculated the percent change in terms of this
MV is
equation.
equals to PT. So you are saying then your price level is, if you take the initial 105, this is transactions, this is velocity is supposed to remain the same as 100, and money supply, let's say, goes up to 102, and you're saying what happens if you calculate then 102 into 100 divided by 105, that is 97, which basically would mean minus 3. Interesting. Okay, so continuing with our paper. 21, in a closed economy with no government, investment increases by 400. At the new equilibrium level of income, consumption has increased by 1200. What is the value of the investment multiplier? Now, your investment multiplier is literally just the normal regular multiplier that we have studied, so don't worry don't think that you have to do anything different with that. You just have to figure out how, what is the difference that you get in national income, because you already have the autonomous injection here that was investment. So you just need to figure out, how much does national income change by. And a lot of you would say 3, because, well, you would think that national income changed by 12 because consumption increased. But that would be wrong, because if you look at a closed economy with no government, understand then aggregate expenditure is C plus I. And, well, I has gone up by 400 and C has gone up by 1200, which means aggregate expenditure has gone up by 1600. And the reason that aggregate that your national income has increased by 1600, because was at the equilibrium level of income, your aggregate expenditure is equals to your national income for the economy to be at equilibrium. So an injection of 400 leads to an increase in national income of 1600, 4 times as much basically. That is 4. Assuming a constant income velocity of circulation of money, if the price level increases by 5% and money supply grows by 2%, what will be the approximate change in real output that is in transactions? So we can go by MV is equals to PT. And now one way to go about um, is just to like take the base value for all of these values. Let's say you took the base value as 100 because that's an easy value to manage, and then you factor in the changes. So if price was initially 100, now it'll be 105. If transactions, well, we don't know about transactions, we leave that. If velocity was initially 100 and it has to be constant, it would still remain 100 as its base value. If the money supply was initially 100, it would now be 102. Then you quickly plop that into your calculator to get the value of transactions. And that's coming approximately 97, which means if transactions again was initially 100, as all values we took were initially 100. So it was initially 100, but now it is 97. So it's gone down by 3%, which would mean your value is A. Another way you can do this, if in case you didn't understand this way, is just to make V the subject, because you know that V is the same, and just look at it in terms of percentages. So this has increased by 5% and this has increased by 2%, which means the change on P upon M, this overall thing has increased by 3%. You just subtract 5 minus 2, because if your numerator is increasing by 5%, your denominator, and increasing your denominator kind of like goes against that. So it's like that's like 5 minus 2 then. So your price upon your P upon M is increasing by 3%. You want this to be equals to V, which is a constant. So clearly your T has to be decreasing by 3% for this to cancel out and for it to be equals to V, which is a constant. So those are two ways to think about it, whichever way you find easier. I think the first one was easier, but anyhow. So why will an inflationary process be brought to a halt if the money supply is held constant? Okay, so consumption will decrease as money incomes decline. I'm not too sure if the money supply is held constant. I'm not sure if how that leads to money incomes declining. So we'll put a small cross against this for now. Government expenditure will have to be reduced as government revenues decline. Let's read all the options for this one before I say anything. The rate of interest will rise as more money is required for transactionary purposes. In fact, I like this because uh, if an inflationary process is going about, well, that clearly means your outputs, your incomes, all of that increases, and obviously your transactional demand for money depends on income. So income increases, inflationary pressure, the transaction demand for money should increase. And if your money supply is constant like this, your demand for money, well, that's a bad diagram, but the demand for money goes up, which means your interest rates go from R to R1, and your interest rates, an increase in interest rates is contractionary, so it goes against inflation, because increase in interest rates kind of decreases investment, increases the opportunity cost of consumption, so it decreases consumption as well. So I think we can conclude with C. And if you read D, the stimulus to invest will decline as the real burden of company debt. Well, that's just irrelevant. I don't know where they got company debt from. So you can cross those out. 24, the diagram shows the determination of the rate of interest in the economy where M represents the money supply and LP represents the liquidity preference. What could cause a rise in the rate of interest from R1 to R2? So if you look here, this in a way, this is an increase in the demand for money. We know that. And an increase in the demand for money could happen by an increase in national income, because especially this part is mainly where it's mainly interest inelastic. That's mainly your precautionary and your transactionary demand for money, which are functions of income. If income goes up, your transactionary demand for money should go up, and that's fine. Your money supply is clearly constant here, and even if you increase your money supply, that would only have a downward effect on your interest rates rather than an upward. A reduction in investment expenditure. Well, if well, no, I mean, if you're well, if you're having less investments, that could increase interest rate, but I don't think that's what is shown here. Um, the reduction in loans, again, I don't. This what is shown in this particular diagram is the liquidity preference curve theory, not the other alternative theory of loanable funds for determination of interest rates. So we can just go with A. An economy is experiencing economic growth, what will be the effect on its rate of inflation, level of unemployment, and current account surplus? So if you're experiencing economic growth, your rate of inflation should increase because, well, AD increases and stuff of that sort. Yeah.
Economic growth could be potential and actual both.
Oh,
So you're not really sure कौन सी वाली growth है.
so maybe, I mean, in some cases, you could also entertain the possibility that um, your your rate of inflation is uncertain. Um, I guess it would be because let's say if your aggregate supply increases, that's also growth. That would just have a downward effect on your price level. Level of unemployment. So if you look at actual growth, like AD increases, the level of unemployment should just lower. But again, if you're looking at something like the PPC shift, like aggregate supply increases, but even if aggregate supply increases, the level of unemployment should be lower though, because more people are employed, more output. Um, that makes things interesting. Um, your current account surplus, if you're experiencing growth, I believe the surplus, I mean, it could either be uncertain or it could either in.
I think surplus depends upon a lot of other things, elasticity क्या है product की और बाकी सब कुछ भी.
It does. That's true. So what do you suggest we do here?
I would go for D because like unemployment. मतलब, if your productive capacity increases and you're not employing a lot of people, then technically your level of unemployment has fallen, na? So it
Yes,
could
but
be D.
normally what we do associate with economic growth is still an increase in output, even in an increase in actual output as well.
हाँ,
Um,
so increase in output या तुम अगर डायग्राम बनाओ और उसमें तुम AS को शिफ्ट कराओ तो आउटपुट माइट इंक्रीज बट अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट लेवल भी तो बढ़ रहा है ना क्योंकि ज्यादा नंबर ऑफ पीपल हैव द स्किल्स.
yeah, I get your point. Like if you're doing a PPC here, like that your PPC went to this, so your unemployment can increase. But at the same time, output also increases. So like your
Want to
actual.
diagram, if you draw the ASAD वाली diagram, so उसी में अगर तुम देखो,
Okay.
if you shift D or AS outward say at the same AD अगर तुम AS को shift कराओगे, so the output level might rise, but you see output तो बढ़ा है लेकिन unemployment तुम्हें कैसे पता बढ़ी है कि नहीं बढ़ी या कम
But
हुई.
then you look at your long run aggregate supply, and based on how that's shifted, uh, I'm not sure. I'm not. I'm just worried if we're overcomplicating the question. I mean, if you think about about it intuitively, as you grow, you normally have a higher rate of inflation, a lower level of
बट
unemployment, and
ग्रोथ अगर आपकी एक्चुअल ग्रोथ हो रही हो ना, आई
yeah,
गेस वो कि अगर पोटेंशियल ग्रोथ भी तो हो सकती है.
possible. I mean, I get your logic, but the options don't seem to really coincide that way, because I would still believe that your unemployment level, because because you're more stimulated in when you're growing. That's the idea. So you would say D.
हाँ, इट्स इट.
Um, I don't know. I get your logic. I'm just a little worried that we're overcomplicating things. I don't know. I would still stick with B. I don't know. Very sleepy. And anyhow, let's see at the end of the. We'll check our answers at the end of the paper, at the end of the video. So, um, which change to the country's output would most likely lead to a fall in potential growth? So you have to go away, you have to consume less of capital goods and more of consumer goods. So that would be most likely to lead to a fall in potential growth. So Y to Z decreases capital goods, so I think that is fine. Y to X does not. U to X increases capital goods. U to V also increases capital goods. So you can go with D, because less capital goods, probably less potential growth. Mm, 727, in a developing country receiving foreign financial aid is a developing country receiving foreign financial aid is most likely to experience economic growth in the long run if it uses the money to, so again this is talking about long run growth, boost welfare benefits. Well, welfare benefits, I don't think that really does much in the long run. It's like, well, you got welfare benefits, you used it to eat, to have healthcare and all of that, and that just kind of goes away. If you pay for imports of capital goods, well, that might, because capital goods would then increase your productive potential in the long run. Um, Environmental pollution, I don't see how that necessarily achieves economic growth. It might achieve development. Reduce income tax for all households would just increase AD in the short run, but one wouldn't really result in economic growth in the long run. 28, increased borrowing by the government results in higher interest charges, because and this leads to less private investment expenditure, which is a clear textbook example of your crowding out effect, which is basically an issue of your, of increased government expenditure. Obviously, increased government expenditure means increased borrowing. So as the government itself borrows, it pushes up interest rates, and because, you know um, interest rate when interest rates go up, investments go down. So that's clearly an example of the crowding out effect. Don't know how else we can explain that. um, the data below relate to a particular country for the 4 years shown. What can definitely be concluded from these data? Economic growth between year 2 and year 3 was 11%. Uh, so we have real GNP. Um, and if we look over here, is this really 11%? Because if you want to calculate the change, well, I'm getting 10%, in fact, because the growth between these 2 years would be the difference in percentage. And like, if you take this to, if you do something like this, into of all of it into 100, you're getting 10%, not 11%. So I think we can cross that out. The level of economic development was better in year 2 than in year 1. So in year 2, the life expectancy went down, which is bad, and the percentage of age group enrolled in secondary education. What do you think? What do you think they mean by this percentage of age group? Hmm.
आई जस्ट थिंक कि कितना ज़्यादा
Yeah, I think
मतलब
we can,
हाँ, इस एज की पॉपुलेशन कितनी है आपके इकॉनमी
in secondary education. Um,
वाले एज ग्रुप हैं वो कितने वो हैं, मतलब जो इस एज ग्रुप में लाए करते हैं वो कितना एजुकेशन में हैं.
Okay, so there's a specific age group. They haven't given us the courtesy of knowing which one, but how much percentage of that age group is enrolled in secondary education, and that has gone down as well. So was not better; it was far worse. In fact, there was both economic growth and improvement in economic development between year two and year three. So if you look at year two to year three, there was definitely growth, uh, and your life expectancy increased, your percentage of age groups that are enrolled in secondary education. So I don't know if you can definitely conclude this. I don't know if you can definitely conclude that there was economic development. You can conclude that there was economic growth. Um, and maybe there's an improvement in economic development. I'll just hold on to this until we read option D. No conclusions can be drawn as to whether the level of economic development was better in year four than in year three. Um,
I think it should be C because like क्योंकि it's HDI ना, so like HDI does give an, if not accurate, at least a somewhat representation of economic development.
yeah,
So
yeah,
अगर
yeah.
HDI
Yeah, in fact, the
should,
three metrics that they're looking at are those that the HDI look at. Um, and in all three of them, from year two to year three, they are getting better. Like so, the GNP improves, which clearly means economic growth has happened, but economic growth also contributes to economic development. This has improved. This has improved. So I think we can go for C rather. Um, 30, a government's budget is balanced at a time when the economy is fully employed, but an aggregate demand shock. So I believe where aggregate demand increases or decreases.
decrease.
Yeah, because it's causing a decline in national income, so probably a decrease. Anyhow, uh, so shock might just refer to how it's a sudden change. What will be the result if the government keeps its tax rates and level of spending um, unchanged? So what's happening here that you have a decline in national income, and but it's not doing anything. It's just keeping its spending and tax rates unchanged. So there definitely is. Hmm, the level of
It
spending.
should a budget deficit
It should be a budget deficit.
and cyclical तो होना चाहिए वैसे भी, structural तो नहीं हो सकता.
So what is the difference between cyclical and structural? Could you explain that?
Structure is like कि मतलब permanently हो गया ना, demand shock is more like कि हाँ temporarily, for example flood आ गया या इस तरह की कोई चीज हो गई कि हाँ cyclical, मतलब it's more of the fact कि like change हो सकता है.
Yeah, so cyclical and anyway, cyclical stuff is normally linked to changes in aggregate demand. So should it be a budget deficit? So your budget is basically your tax revenue minus your government um, expenditure. Now, and we said that your tax rates, the rate and the level of spending is unchanged. So the spending is the same, the level of spending. The tax rates are the same. However,
If national income कम हो गया
yeah,
तो obviously you get a less revenue but your expenditure is the same.
yeah. So because we know the government expenditure was looking at the level, so that will be the same. Um, but your tax was looking at this was tax rates, which means the tax revenue should probably decrease because well, there's less economic activity, there's a decline in national income, so there's less income to be taxed at the same rate. So which is why becomes more negative, which is makes it go towards a deficit. Um, so now we can quickly check our answers to the last 10 MCQs. Yeah, so we checked our answers and we got, well, I think we can say that we got all of these questions right. I got this one wrong. It was in fact D, 25, because of the same idea that, economic growth is not just about actual potential growth could also increase, which means if your aggregate supply increases, then your rate of inflation will be uncertain. Your level of unemployment then depends based on how your potential increases. And obviously, your current account surplus is uncertain. In fact, I can show you what the exam reports are on this because majority chose B like me. Only 22 went for D. So it says, although the rate of inflation may increase in certain circumstances as a result of economic growth, it is not guaranteed to do so. Similarly, economic growth may increase capital technology rather than employment, and any increase in income may be spent on imports rather than domestic production. So the current account surplus need not necessarily increase, and that's another explanation. But Shariat had mainly explained this, why it could be D if you just consider the possibility of a growth in potential rather than just a growth in actual. So that's it for this paper.